then we can move on.
Never is. But
I
yeah.
suggest you recap because it was something that was stated in the previous meeting, and then a Hangouts thread based on that. And you said there might be some misunderstandings. Maybe you can provide a recap of what was discussed, your understanding of it, and then.
Yeah. So when I watched the recording, people kind of agreed that voting buttons need a semantic labeling, like what an upvote actually means. Does it mean agreement, or does it mean like I want this on the top of the list, or what it does? And yeah, there was, as I heard, there was consensus that it matters, and that doesn't make sense to me, because I think it's the whatever I write there, it doesn't change the behavior of the system. It might change the behaviors of the humans a little bit, but let's have this extreme thought experiment that we say, okay, let's take Hacker News, and next to all the upvote buttons, we write dislike. Like, does it change anything?
But I think that's my point was, because I think I was the one that raised it in that meeting. Right now, it's very hard to label the button Hacker News because it doesn't have clear semantics. So no, because dislike is not what that button does. So, but if you can very clearly label what that button does, and the system does exactly that, and you can make it transparent to the user what that button does, that's what I was arguing for. So I would argue it's very difficult to label that button Hacker News because of the complexity underlying it. That's part of the problem.
But like, for example, take Facebook as an example, the like button. Does it mean that people like that post, or that people want this post to get more attention by others?
It doesn't mean that people like it, and there's papers that have shown that that's also why Facebook went through the whole effort of having different emotions that you can correlate. Like was very superficial. But the example that I raised and the design that I adopt right now is, if it's very unambiguous when you say, I believe in this claim, and the only thing that you can believe in are claims. It's very unambiguous what it means if 100 people say they believe in that claim. It means that 100 people believe in that claim.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the system should therefore put it at the top of the list, but that metric becomes interpretable. That's all I was arguing for.
Let me see if I can expand on Felix's thought experiment. So in your system, let's say you had buttons for agree, disagree. And so it's very clear if 100 people agree, 100 people disagree, what that means. But what if somebody snuck in and swapped the labels? And everyone, there's a big green button on the left and a big red button on the right that used to be agree, disagree, but someone swapped them. And now it's a green disagree button and a red agree button, and people are a little bit confused. What's going to happen with that ambiguity?
Not to mention colorblind users.
Yes, yeah. And so what may happen is people continue to just go with the button on the left, or people may pay more attention to the label depending on how big the font is. But I think what Felix is trying to say is people's behaviors are not determined by labels. Labels just provide sort of a hint, but people's behavior ultimately can be determined by complex feedback loops. And so if the Facebook button said dislike, but it caused your post to be amplified, caused that post to be amplified, people would just click dislike on all the things that they liked.
Yeah, but it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, I think you make a false dichotomy there. It's both. The people, their behavior is influenced by the label as well as the effects of.
I didn't intend to make that dichotomy at all. But the whole point is exactly what you're saying. It's both, yeah.
And of course, and that's why it fully depends on what the system does with it. And that should also be transparent. And if that's transparent, and then so it's more of a discussion, what do we want to do with the scoring than what is a suitable label. But what I'm saying is to do anything meaningful to the user, that's transparent to the user, what happens with the scoring, there need to be clear labels. I think that's the extended form of my argument.
I really like the idea of having transparent, like even for, I know that this will not affect the average user, but I think having the algorithm written somewhere, like connected, like in the, you know, about the system or learn more, so that people know that the explanation is there, and even if they don't understand it, they can ask their geeky, mathy friend what it means. It does build trust. Even if you don't understand the explanation yourself, to know that the explanation is there, it does build trust. And
Well,
I think that's extremely important.
It builds trust in the platform. I don't know if it builds trust in the results, because if you think about, for example, Google, the Google search algorithm, Google mixes it up and hides their algorithm because specifically they want trust in the results. And if you lay out the algorithm there for all SEO people to gamify, you stop trusting the results. And in the question here of, of the CD specifically, there is a balance. I think it's less serious, but there is a balancing point there, because what are the things people can interpret? We want people to show if they agree or disagree with something, and that's pretty clear. We also want to register somehow the quality of an argument, and you know, that quality, there's aspects of the quality, they're well written, but there's also, is it just a good argument? And so you may upvote the relevance, as I call it, of an argument by saying it's a good argument, even though you disagree, in this case, with the underlying premise. So those are different signals we want, and especially specifically, relevance is a metric that people can attack because they disagree with the underlying one. They may give contrary signals to what is it actually, if they independently just read it, would say. And the final thing is, if we have an algorithm like maybe Stephen is proposing disagreement, finding disagreements, in some way, the system may prioritize at some point claims that have high levels of disagreement, which means a lot of up and down votes, as opposed to items that have no votes whatsoever. And so maybe you want to attack the popularity of a claim by just not voting at all, even though you disagree or something. So those I think are
that's one of them. But the other one that I always highlight is, I mean, those are interesting claims, or not. Actually, where a lot of people both agree and disagree, it's very often a depends case, and it's better to talk about more specific claims. That's the experience that I have. But another very common case that I always highlight as an example is, if everyone believes in a claim, but there's no reason why people believe in that, the correlation between how many people that have expressed a claim of a claim have also expressed motivations for believing that claim, arguments. If that's absent, that's also highly problematic, because I would call it populist. It's like, oh yeah, I've heard this, but I've never thought about this, which is equally something that should be given more priority to be discussed.
Agree totally that, and that's something Jonathan raised, right? I mean, we need to know what people are aware of, so that your vote on something you don't understand is meaningless. And I think it's also vaguely a solution to the issue of gaming, vaguely, in that at some point, if you're going to say this is irrelevant to that, then okay, why is it irrelevant? And if you don't have a good answer, you get your weight as a person, as a voter, gets lowered. You're not following the rules of the system. You're misusing the system. This is a measure I want to have. Like, your misusing the system should be something that's measurable. And I mean, we have logic rules for that reason. And there are a set of meta rules that we can get. We can measure how well users are abiding by the meta rules. And I think that's part of the explicitness. The other thing is, I think you have a point, Tim, that the point about gaming the system, we're dealing with an adversarial environment, and that's totally true. But this is why maybe we could have more or less transparent overall visibility algorithms, and I'm not sure what the right answer is, but we could also have alongside fully transparent other scores. And I think that when we're speaking about especially helping with decision support system, well, the decision support score should be fully transparent, and it can exist alongside other measures that rank attention, which may or may not be transparent. You see what I'm saying? There's a distinction between, if we have multiple measures, then we can have fully transparent measures and maybe not fully transparent measures alongside and play with those. But I still think even for a fully transparent system, giving a score to people is also going to matter. When you're polluting the infosphere, it should be measured. And I did say, I want people to be scored on their ability to predict things. So if we do this, this will happen, okay. Now, of course, it requires access to a common reality, which is one of the scarce resources right now, but still, it's, I think it's more solvable than other problems.
Felix was going to say something. But...
Yeah, right. So I just had the thought, like, maybe that's where Stephen and I disagree, because Stephen said, like, it's a voting system where we count how many people agreed or disagreed, and the score itself does not change anything in the system. It doesn't influence the order of anything. Is that what you're saying, Stephen?
No, it probably will influence the order, but as long as it's clear how it influences the order, and yeah, what's the outcome hereafter? Like I said, I mean, as long as there's a clear connection between the outcome, the ordering, and how your scoring impacts that, and you agree that, oh, the order should be higher. But I mean, to talk details, you need to talk about which ordering. Are we talking about the ordering of the supporting arguments, or because it's very, you shouldn't compare this to Google. We're not really, I mean, it's an entirely different use case, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, because maybe we're talking about different things, because I agree, like, if it doesn't influence any ordering whatsoever, it's just like counting people, then of course the labeling matters, right?
The only ordering I can imagine is, suppose you have 100 different supporting arguments, like which one are you going to give precedence to show? And that's why Timothy's like, yeah, you want to probably show the high quality arguments first. And then indeed, then we need to talk about what is a high quality argument. And my current metric for that is both one that is very popular and is well supported. Well supported can be measured in the sense of how many underlying arguments are there and how popular are those in turn. And then you have Timothy's whole role of scoring, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and this is where you'd have competing scoring mechanisms, because I would probably want one that doesn't include popularity. I mean, you need a threshold to say it's not spam or something, but I would want essentially the highest relevance and highest agreement as being at the top. But so that you could flip back and forth between scoring, but in each case you kind of want, one of the goals would be to have the most relevant or most important, most whatever at the top, because somebody and this is, you also need to choose a default, because you want people to come into the system. One of the goals is you drop in, and in a minute you get a quick overview of what the main points are, right?
Yeah, relevance of course should also be incorporated.
Yeah. So I think we've used the term strength of an argument that is both relevant and whose claims are true or acceptable is a strong argument. And how to exactly combine them. So I've got the formula I'm working on for combining those. But are you guys both suggesting that perhaps the strongest arguments there might be one algorithm that puts the strongest arguments on the top?
Well, sorry, microphone, I'll let you go.
Well, that was the change by mind algorithm, right? It was saying which algorithms have convinced people. And I think that's extremely interesting, because there's a lot of relevant, valid arguments that are so consensual that it's not worth putting them on, right? If everybody agrees with a certain argument, it's like, okay, that's necessary precondition that everybody agrees on. It's not that important to show it. It can be important because sometimes you want to check, what seems obvious, but is it the most important for someone who's just learning about the issue? I doubt it. Over.
Yeah, and my point is simply, you need to show both. If relevance is important and popularity is important, you need to clearly show both. So, and then you can even allow customizing sorting based on whatever the user decides, show the most relevant ones, show the most popular ones. It just becomes a matter of if the scoring is transparent and semantically meaningful, then the visualization can also be made semantically meaningful.
Stephen, I'm not sure.
And if there's multiple scores, you need multiple sorts. Over, sorry.
Stephen, I'm not sure what you mean by the difference between relevance and popularity. So I definitely have a concept of the difference between popular opinion and what I call justified opinion. But relevance of an argument and acceptance of the premises of those arguments are both scores that can have popular scores and justified scores. So I make a different distinction there.
I'm not certain it's different. Popularity was maybe wrong. It just mean how many people agree with it and which are the most relevant ones. You can have highly relevant claims that support in an argument that support a certain conclusion that not many people believe in. So it's relevant if it were true, and you can have claims that everyone believes in, but that the majority believes is not relevant.
The relevance is itself a claim, and there can be, and that can be a popular claim, and that people think it's relevant, and so
it can be contested.
Exactly.
Yep, and it can be, and then there's the justified opinion about that relevance. And so in both cases, the scores are subjective, and that means popularity plays a role. We just don't want pure raw popular opinion. So you can break down, there's the overall knee-jerk reaction to a claim, which is just the popular opinion. Then there's people's votes on argument B for claim A, and there's then there's votes on the relevance of B to claim A, right? And both of those have sub-argument graphs. But the original votes on claim B, of course, it's recursive, and we can go on forever because the original votes on claim A is just popular, and the original votes on the relevance of B is just a popular vote until someone makes an argument supporting B or supporting the relevance of B to A. And so you can't escape at some point reaching the terminal nodes of your argument graph, and all you have to go on at that point is popularity.
Vague disagreement there, in that on the one hand, you're right. On the other, the whole point of logic is that there are known rules for relevance, which have nothing to do with popularity, and that these are structural. Now, I don't fully agree with the logical standpoint that logic is everything, and there's a lot of so-called fallacies that are actually heuristic, and hence I wouldn't totally dismiss them. But all that said, it's still true that there is such a thing as an objectively irrelevant argument, and that it can be detected by people, and yes, it's an expert opinion, but people who understand the rules and can make a reference to the rules and say, okay, these are the kind of meta rules of logic we're using in this conversation, and this is irrelevant according to that rule. And unless I'm myself making an irrelevant claim, but this is where I want to have a score for people who are using the rules properly and people who are not using the rules properly. That does mean there's a kind of seed trust data that grounds a lot of the judgments. But I would ground the judgments not on saying your this is true, assumed true or assumed not true, but this is an assumed valid usage of the rules, and these are the rules we assume.
So you've raised 2 points. So first, the point of people using the system correctly, and then basically I would call that a reputation system.
Yep.
But I think that maybe is that something, a discussion we should make a topic, and we could talk forever about reputation systems and how reputation is derived. And I think we agree that reputation should be derived somehow by people's ability to make and defend good arguments. Exactly how that works, we can set aside. But then you're talking about objectively true arguments, and what you're describing there is
Objectively valid.
based on some formal representation of arguments. And so you're talking about a more sophisticated system that we're only going to get to after a process of progressive formalization. But I think maybe to simplify things to start with, we kind of need to assume that relevance is going to have to be determined subjectively, even if there are objective arguments to be made. I think that those don't come in until we start formalizing logic.
Sorry, Tim, I'll just answer that quickly. I think that the rules of logic and argument soundness can apply to informal arguments. A non sequitur is a non sequitur, whether formal or informal. And we can make the point. Now, we have to
objective determination, wouldn't it? Someone would argue that non sequitur.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And this is why it's a reputation system, and there has to be a seed of, and we have to be very clear that we distinguish between a score for people who are knowledgeable. For example, I spoke of the prediction score, and those are a certain type of reputation. And there's another type of reputation which I want to be clearly detached is using the logic rules properly. and this is a very ground truth kind of thing. Is not cheating is almost what I want to say.
So maybe something that kind of approaches that is a scoring system I was thinking of. So I think we all agree there's a difference between popular opinion that is completely unjustified, yep, and then a justified opinion. In the simplest case, it's just the opinion of people that have at least given a reason for their belief. And that could be different from popular opinion, or people that have at least responded to the reasons given by others. And we can get more complicated, kind of the whole point of an algorithm. But that difference is very important, because if there's a difference between popular opinion and justified opinion, according to some formula, now you can have a reputation based on the ability to predict what the justified opinion is, or to have an opinion that is ultimately justified. In other words, the ability to defend your positions.
Sorry, Tim, I do want to finish this. I want to have a clear distinction. The distinction you're raising is important, and I believe in it, but it's not the one I was raising. It's because you're still referring to justification as a kind of external truth, and I'm speaking more of well-foundedness, well-formedness. Like, yeah, I could say,
logical sense, yeah.
Is it valid or invalid that Earth flatness depends on the moon being made of cheese? So you can make a sound or unsound argument about those two ridiculous facts. and this is what I want to measure. Is that argument a non sequitur or not? And I don't care that you're arguing about Earth flatness and Earth being, and moon being made of cheese for that metric. I can care of it for other metrics, and justification is one of them, and blah, blah, blah. But I really want to distinguish the metric of argument soundness as a very distinct metric. Tim, sorry.
Yeah. So I think I don't know if you're both talking about the same kind of reputation. It almost sounds more like Marc-Antoine is talking about the reputation of the person creating the argument. But also okay, maybe you're not, maybe I'm wrong about that. But yeah, there's the reputation of the person creating the arguments, and there's the reputation of the person voting, which, are you up voting, down voting the wrong thing, quote unquote wrong, right? I think I agree with Jonathan that it's always going to be subjective until we have formalization. I see formalization solving a lot of that problem because of matching of entities and that sort of thing in terms of premise to conclusion and that sort of thing. But and then we can imagine situations where, well, I'll go straight to the point that Jonathan was talking about, which is this is how I also see the scoring system of, I talk about levels, right? So there's a level 0 scoring system is the popular vote, unfounded, as you put it, right? A level 1 would be comparing your popular vote with how you've scored the relevance and your agreement on the underlying premises. Does that match? Are you upvoting, downvoting things that imply your vote on the conclusion is consistent, right? And you can keep going down layers and layers, and you can see, are these people scoring down layers, and are they being consistent going down the layers? So there's, I guess, different kinds of bad behavior that I would try to call, attacks on the scoring algorithms, right? Which are, does the person always score 0 on something that everybody else scores 100? Are they contrarians, essentially, consistently contrarian? Are they consistent with themselves at all levels? Are they only popular voting, or are they actually comparing different levels? So there's different kinds of behavior we can analyze. And I definitely agree that analyzing at multiple levels is one of the tools we can use for that.
We can, but what is there some consensus on what the reason is for doing that? Is it to show people this person is an idiot, or why do you want to do this?
There's different ways. The main reason I imagine these kinds of mechanisms was so that an individual could analyze their own consistency.
Exactly.
Yeah, but from a systems perspective, worrying about cheating and attacks on the scoring itself, that would be the reason, is you want to find bad actors, right? Intentionally bad actors.
So it could be a flag for spam, or
right,
like bots that don't really reflect true opinion. So I guess that would make sense.
I mean, there's like I've said before, there's a danger in this, which is the good actor who's intentionally bringing into the system bad behavior from outside the system, right? Finding all the fake news so you can debate about it, making totally non sequitur arguments because you saw it out there. Somehow
Isn't this
want to
assuming you, because I know you believe in a system where one account is one person. Given that is the case, do you even care? I mean, if that person truly wants to say, I believe in all the fake news, is that being a bad actor? Or is it just a person that believes in all the fake news?
Okay, I think that one place where it's really important is if you want to crowdsource relevance. If you're saying this argument is relevant for that, and this is where I'm saying I want to detect the non sequiturs, and it's also a way to say I want to detect motivated reasoning. In the sense, if you say this argument cannot be relevant because I don't like the conclusion, as opposed to I could just say I believe the premise is false because, which is a valid thing. Now, in the case of the person bringing the weird non sequitur from outside, they could bring it, create it, and say, I believe it's irrelevant. That's fine. But I do want to be able to say, this person is giving relevant scores, which don't seem to follow logic, like they seem to say non sequiturs are relevant or valid argument are irrelevant instead of downvoting the believability of the premise. And this is where I want to say, this person's vote shouldn't count much in the relevant score. I want to decrease the weight of that person, the relevant score, because their relevant scores are bogus.
So it's a measure almost of rationality.
Yes.
But why would you do that on an account level? Why not on a per vote level is what I'm wondering. I find it somewhat problematic that you want to flag somehow on behavior of a full person and how they vote across any topic. And they may believe truly that something is irrelevant, that all of a sudden then you're going to weigh their votes on other totally unrelated things, less.
Right.
Well-
It could be refined by domain. Yes, I see the point. I do think that, and I did say in the chat, I think it's important to allow retractions. So basically, if I'm saying this is relevant, someone says this is irrelevant because, and I say, okay, yeah, you have a point. Okay, I don't need to be dinged for that because retraction is accepted. But I think there is such a thing as global rationality, and more important, global irrationality, and especially if it's motivated reasoning. I expect the bot, like the algorithm that really wants to game the system, to not care about relevance and to be able to say, yeah, I want to downvote this bot and everything. And actually what we see in bot farms is they make a lot of very plausible things on innocuous stuff to sound like a normal person otherwise, and then use that to peddle conspiracy. And I think, yeah, I think it is relevant to say what you're saying here shouldn't necessarily bleed, or
I think a measure reputation score based on rationality, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, is a great idea. Now, of course, who decides whether your past judgments have been rational? And that is almost an orthogonal consideration. There's different ways you can deal with that. You can have a closed system, where there's only people you.
I did say we'd need a seed for that, yes.
It can be totally decentralized. It can be people in your own social network. And so among people in your social network, this person has a high reputation for rationality. And I would base rationality generally on, you consider someone to be rational simply if they tend to come to the same conclusions given the same premises. There, obviously, once you get into formalization, you can have different criteria, but until you formalized, relevance is still subjective. And so the only way you could measure rationality is coming to the same conclusion based on the same premises. But I think that in some cases, that's actually very valuable, especially let's say you're trying to do some fact checking. And there's some rumor, a lot of people say, spread that rumor, it's very popular. You post, look, this is totally debunked with this, interview with the detective, or something that's just, any rational person would read that and say, oh yeah, it's an authoritative source. This is obviously just a rumor. And now you can measure rationality. You agree with that premise. You think it's relevant. You think someone that believes B should believe A. And if somebody accepts B and still accepts A, now the system can compute that at least relative to you, that person is irrational. And in fact, I think there could even be voting where you could say, look, at this point, if somebody given these premises still believes A, I'm going to flag that as like bad faith even. And I want to start discounting the opinions of this person in the system.
Interesting.
Yeah, I see that point, and I see how it nicely fits in with what Mike and Twan said, and I'm not even against that, but I think it should be optional. I mean, if you're ever going to flag people like that, and I think you truly can with mechanisms as you've just described, which is a lot of work, which probably is procedural formalization, but if we ever get there, which hopefully we will, I still think it should be optional to weed out these votes. And it's going to be subjective even how to weed out these votes, because as you highlighted, Jonathan, you might not agree with that reasoning being rational or irrational or not. So again, as long as it's transparent how this is being done, I'm on board.
I think we all agree the transparency is given by the multiple scoring. It is one scoring measure. What Jonathan's proposing is, it's very interesting. I would not have gone that direction. It is basically a statistical measure of rationality. But that means, as you say, it is in itself gameable. Like if everybody agreed on cognitive bias, for example, which are tested and consistent, then that becomes rational. And that's worrying me a bit. This is why I'm going for more. I was frankly thinking—
that's where strategy proofness and consensus protocols can come in. So I think actually you can have a consensus protocol that creates an equilibrium around a certain standards of rationality.
I was even thinking, frankly, of getting some people, and this would be a kind of badge system. There would be rationality dojos and saying, why is this why is this a non sequitur, and why is this a bad faith argument, and blah blah blah, right? And testing the rationality, like on the understanding of the rules, because as I said, there are rules about argument soundness which are known and established.
So in going into a little bit of game theory, but the reason, blockchain works is it's basically a voting system where you're rewarded if you vote with the majority. It's a Keynesian beauty contest. And in some blockchains, there are oracles. There are embedded into the blockchain's claims about the real world, such as the price of a stock, for example. And the miners or validators in the blockchain vote on what they think the correct value is. And people tend to vote truthfully because they know everyone else is going to vote truthfully. And because the claim is objectively verifiable. These are simple things that anyone can look up. So everyone else knows what the right answer is. And you can have these sort of, with very, very simple fact-checking systems, you can have these sorts of stable consensus protocols based on a Keynesian beauty contest if there's something at stake, such as reputation or cryptocurrency. And I don't know if you guys are all following that, but that is how you can have, Schelling coin was an article written by Vitalik Buterin, which described, first described this system where you can actually have a protocol where people agree on truth and they, there's a strong equilibrium around truthfulness. And you can actually, I think, extend that to certain standards of rationality. So imagine in this protocol, everyone's feeding in price data from the same API, and there's an error. I think you could actually extend those protocols. So someone could say, hey, look, the price data that we all agreed was the correct data, this price of $0, which is actually just an error in the API that we were all pulling from, can submit an appeal and submit a reason. One of a standard set of reasons, like a tag, like error in API tag, right? And then the corrected data, right? And what you could do is eventually get a similar equilibrium where everyone knows that if somebody submits this error in API appeal, and if there really was an error in the API, and this really is the correct data, then you can know that everyone's going to vote on that. And again, it's the Keynesian beauty contest. It's game theory. There's a whole, it depends on precedent. Once the precedent has been established where everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows that this is how people are going to vote, then you can count on people voting that way. And so what you have there is sort of a protocol that is the beginning of an argumentation system where people submit arguments based on very, very simple standards of rationality, and you form that equilibrium around those standards of rationality.
I like the idea of tagging with specific errors a lot. I'm not sure about the Canadian beauty contest because it seems statistical and I'm trying to make it logical, but saying, here's why I believe, because I know that rules of reasons are also negotiated. Some are bedrock, some are negotiated. Sorry, Tim.
I'm just gonna say, what's interesting about that is that those are shared truth engines, right? It's governance or rules based on shared truth, and that's what the canonical debate is not, right? Exactly the opposite. We don't want to incentivize truth, except personal truth. We want to incentivize honesty, sincerity, which means we want cognitive biases to work into this as well. We just don't want people to be trying to gamify the numbers themselves. But again, you have to worry about the attacks, right? I'm not so concerned if it's just one person playing games with the scoring mechanism. But you have to look at where that sort of behavior is dangerous. And maybe that's in because of amplification rules, where if you can find the right claim that was submitted recently and doesn't have enough votes, and you can do a bad faith vote at the right time and place, you impact long term, right? The debate. That would be something that concerns me. But maybe somebody who is just kind of voting randomly or whatever doesn't have so much of an impact. So that's one thing. It's interesting though. There is one point of truth in the system that Marc-Antoine's trying to get at, which is the underlying truth of rationality. I don't know if I believe in any way of getting there besides formalization. But
I think at the end of the argument graph, you have premises, terminal premises that have no supporting or opposing arguments. And those premises can be claims, and they can also be claims of relevance. And at some point, you have to stop the argument. And I think,
but you don't have to stop. You naturally stop. It happens that you stop. But there's no fundamental bottom. Somebody could come and throw in an argument anytime.
You just limited it with the amount of time that you have. And so, and in many of those cases, you'll get down to more and more fundamental, elemental claims that, and in some cases, there won't be a lot of dispute, and someone will make a claim, and everyone will say, "Yeah, I agree with that," but and they'll make a relevance argument. But then, eventually, you get down to these elemental, terminal relevance arguments, and at that point, unless you've found some solution in formalization, the votes on those terminal arguments and all the other arguments is what you have to compute some sort of score, right? And so with distributed Bayesian reasoning, I use that data and to try to estimate what someone would believe if they were aware of the entire argument graph, no matter how large. And so ultimately that rests in this subjective data. But I think that, and this subjective data are sort of like shared truths. And I think you say, like a consensus protocol on a blockchain is based on shared truth. I think ultimately, I don't see any solution for producing results that I can trust unless it is ultimately based in some shared truth at the very foundation. And that's why.
Yeah, I mean, that's the shared truth in that sense would be the content, the structure of the graph itself would be the shared truth you want to ensure, not the results
not the
of
truth
the debate.
in the claims. Yeah.
Well, the terminal claims, there is where honesty matters, right? There ultimately, the terminal claims, including the relevance, the votes on whether this is irrelevant or not, or whether this premise is true or not, they're getting good results depends on honesty, depends on people actually being willing to, being able to trust that when this terminal claim has 90% acceptance rate, then it probably is true.
That's where I disagree. I think it's an interesting outcome if people are putting contradictory votes on the axioms of the base, the leaves, and are disagreeing with themselves higher up. That's still an interesting result, right? That you want to investigate, as long as it's honest. That's what I'm saying. The difference between it being correct or true versus being honest, right? That's a worthy outcome if you're finding out everybody agrees with underlying premises and yet still have contradictory beliefs higher up, right?
So, but how would that work? Because all you can do is aggregate the premises and see the resulting beliefs. So like if you say, you're saying, for example, all right, I say premise B is true. I think it's true. I also think it's very relevant to A, but I think A is false. You're saying that sort of contradiction is what you're looking for, to show people, to help people, right? So I mean, those are two distinct goals: helping people analyze their own reasoning, and then helping people but I see another goal. I want to be able to leverage my social network to find truth. And I want to know if there's something that I don't understand myself, I don't have the time to go into it. I want to basically use other people to extend my brain. And I want to say, okay, this premise B, I'm going to believe it. And I'm not going to believe it just because my buddy Joe told me it's true, or because all my friends think it's true. I'm going to believe this because the justified opinion of the people in my social network that I think are reasonable and trustworthy think that it's true.
Yeah,
but
this is
the more
where you
interesting
bubbles. Go.
Right. Yeah. The more interesting process is I want to believe it's true, but I don't. Why is that? I guess, there is the question of the base axioms, right? There are questions where you just have to believe somebody else. If the proof is somebody said that, for example, it's a perfect example of where you can't go you can debate whether they're trustworthy people or not, but at some point you're going to have to say, I believe this. And there I can see it's relevant that, oh, all these other people I know believe that. And so I'll go with that belief because I have no evidence one way or another. So I'm just going to go with my group. There's a case, right? But if you're talking about a contradiction between a premise and a conclusion, it's much more interesting to explore why your conclusion doesn't match your agreement with the premise than to go with the group. Right?
Absolutely interesting. But at some point, as I explore this argument graph, there might be a premise that's not necessarily axiomatic, that has a whole lot of argument behind it. But I just don't have the time to go and form an independent opinion about it.
So that sounds to me almost like a liquid democracy approach to your belief system here, to the debate, which is, I don't want to even think about it. I'm going to delegate my thinking to somebody I trust.
Well, it's not that I'm lazy. It's that I will choose to do that while you will choose to go and investigate in more detail. You will do that too because you have limits to.
It's limited rationality.
No, but that's where it's interesting to say, that's the way you handle it, as I see it, is, I mean, you've already got a belief, right? You've got your prior, or if you don't have a prior, then and you want to register a score on something, I don't think the right way to do it is whatever my group thinks. I think you need to go and look at the arguments. Otherwise, exactly what Macron Point says, you're creating a bubble, because rather than basing, you're totally new to a subject and you don't have any priors. If you're basing your score on what your group says, that's the wrong approach. I want to disincentivize that, or not even make that available. I would rather say, go take a look at the underlying arguments and form your opinion, right?
So, but at some point, everything that we know, most of what we know comes from other people. It comes from trust. And a lot of us have convinced ourselves that we've, basically have logical reasons for everything we believe. But if we explore the reasons for those reasons and so on and so on, eventually we'll arrive at things that we believe because other people have told us that it's true, and we believe those people. And it's not just my group, right? It's you weigh based on credibility, right? It's not just, again, it's even not popular opinion at the level of the axioms. But at some point I say, look, I know nothing about this subject, but all my friends that do know about the subject seem to think this is true, right? And it's not lazy for me at that point. At some point, maybe not at that point, but at some point, again, I have a limited amount of time, and all of us eventually, our axioms are based on either direct experience, or trust, and it's more often trust.
Yeah, I'll let Stephen go.
You're muted.
Unmute. Steven.
Okay, sorry. This is what in informal logic is called an argument from expert opinion. It is an argument. It is, I mean, it is an argument. I believe in this because of that. And I think both should be possible. You should just be able to say, I believe in this claim. And you should be able to say, I believe in this claim because these experts state that this thing is true. Both are valid. As long as it's clear that that's why certain people believe in it. I would definitely not, and that's why I agree with Timothy, have some automated scoring mechanism where you score whatever someone else scores. I want the users to make explicit, I believe in this because of that.
Yep. And as Felix just commented, it's okay not to have an opinion on something. When I see a system as an extension of my own intelligence, what I want to do is a combination of what Tim is describing. I want to go in and I want to see the arguments that exist for something, and I want to analyze my own opinions. And at some point, analyzing that opinion will be, look, there's a bunch of people that made this, someone made this argument, and everyone seems to think that the premise of this argument is true. And now let me think, okay, well, if it's true, it really is a pretty strong argument against the opinion I formerly had. And I don't necessarily, I can, and at that point, maybe I change my opinion, or maybe I come up with a counter argument and I argue against the relevance of that premise. And I don't even necessarily have to vote on anything. I can just sort of explore the argument tree.
I mean, this to some degree, that's the, I didn't see, you're the one that had a conversation with Bentley, right?
Yesterday.
Scoring, you know, yeah. Like the big advantage I see in his reason score approach is it kind of forces people to, sorry, Felix. Sorry, Marc-Antoine. Then I'll just close this off. It's just that it incentivizes people to come up with a reason why they believe otherwise than what is seeing there.
This is, okay, first, just to finish on the argument about expert opinion. Felix said it's okay not to have an opinion. It's true, but I think it's important to distinguish the case where I don't have an opinion or something, or I have an opinion that is based on my trust in certain experts. These are distinct cases. I don't know enough, but I know enough that these experts have this opinion or blah, blah, blah. I made a point in the chat. I do want to reiterate it. I think it's vaguely important. It's that I think it's not okay to base your belief on your circle, but there is a value in saying, once you've looked at possible options, saying, hey, I really don't understand that option now, that one option or the reasons for it. Who in my circle knows this? Who do I trust that can explain this to me? I think this can be a good social use of social networks. Maybe not primary to me, but interesting. I don't think that's an evil use of the social network. But really the question that the last sentence of Tim is the one I wanted to start with is when you speak of terminal nodes, right? For me, there's the terminal nodes that are uncontested because they're kind of ground truth. And there's terminal nodes that are weakly or even strongly contested, but they're still terminal nodes because nobody gave a reason. And I think it's very important when you say, I disagree with something, please give a reason. And the system should strongly incentivize people who disagree to say why, and to say, I disagree with this because I agree with this counter argument. And so, and then, you know, if that counter argument gets self-countered, we can ask them to respond to that, and so on and so forth. But I think an unjustified con is something I want to give very little weight to, as opposed to a justified con, which I think is extremely important. And that way, the terminal nodes, if there's, I think we should just have mostly fors on the terminal nodes, not many against, because an against that is standing alone on a terminal node should be of little value. And that, again, that should be transparent and explicit. If you're just saying against and you're not telling me why, I don't care.
Terminal nodes that are contested indicate that the argument graph is incomplete.
Right.
It may, yeah. In fact,
now there's still a huge arbitrary belief. Why do you believe this objection, right? And then we can ask, is that objection sound?
Well,
And
that's
blah, blah,
the
blah.
new node. Yeah, you make an argument. That's a new premise, which people can agree with. They can agree with the relevance and so on. Yeah.
No, that's a very good insight. Were you guys aware of this? With the terminal nodes? Okay, it's new for me. Good.
So
What was new to me, just to register that, is I hadn't really thought about the asymmetry between the burden of showing you agree with something versus showing you disagree with something. That's something I hadn't fully reflected on yet.
It's interesting because one of the insights that I had with Socrates is that they're essentially the same if you link negations to claims. They live on the same level, because I mean, not agreeing in something is simply agreeing or believing in the negation.
Yeah.
It essentially stands on par.
Interesting. You're right that agreeing is always disagreeing with the negation, and that way it needs justification.
right, the argument is not complete if there's not unanimity.
Exactly. The question is it contested? Like, and it's when it's contested that it needs justification, probably not about negation, not negation. So I was wrong about that. Fair enough. Thanks.
So often in arguments, to what Tim is saying, analyzing your own thought process. If somebody out there makes an argument, you believe A, someone makes an argument against A, B, the system should show you that, especially if it's a very strong argument, subjectively, according to other people. And it should say, look, people that you have reason to trust think B. Now, maybe B is in a terminal argument at this point. But until you've seen B, in the fact that a lot of people think that it's relevant, and your opinion does not take that into consideration, your opinion in a sense is not justified. And the math of distributed Bayesian reasoning explicitly say that is an unjustified opinion. It's only justified when you look at B and you say, okay, I agree with that, or I'll accept that as true on trust. And then you say, but I don't think it's relevant, or I don't think it's relevant enough to change my opinion. Now your opinion is still justified, even though you might disagree with the majority.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this is actually the main use case for me of argument mapping. It's the interaction that users can have. It's like self-reflecting, and it's a thinking process more than the societal library use case where it's the final authoritative view of everything that's out there. I think we should really look at it as an interactive thing where people can shape their minds by going through the tree and modifying it if they run into new things or want to contribute. I don't think it should. I mean, they're two separate goals. Having curated view is also nice, but we shouldn't forget that it's also about this reasoning
Process.
Yeah, the process.
Yeah,
So-
fully agree. Should we call it a day? You guys want to continue? One has to leave.
Yeah, sorry, hard to stop for. Well, I mean, you can continue without me. I'll watch the replay. But there's a conference on beyond knowledge graphs that I absolutely want to see.
And I have plans for beer, so I think I'm also headed out. It was very interesting. See you maybe tomorrow.
All right, hey, thanks everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Good
Everyone.
conversation. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.